The hegemony's war fleet materialized at the edge of Sol system like a plague of metal locusts, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with the sickly green of conquest. Admiral Vexthul clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as his sensors detected the primitive electromagnetic barrier surrounding the third planet, humanity's laughably inadequate first line of defense. Pitiful, he hissed to his tactical officer, Quinder. These mammals think a glorified shield generator will stop the might of 17 subjugated worlds. The barrier shimmered like aurora as the hegemony fleet approached a gossamer web of energy that had taken humanity decades to construct around Earth's orbital perimeter. It was beautiful, in its way, delicate, breakable. Vexthul's primary weapons charged with a sound like screaming metal. All vessels, concentrate fire on Grid 77. We'll punch through their toys and be dining on human marrow within the cycle. The bombardment began with the fury of dying stars. Plasma lances and particle beams hammered the barrier, each impact sending cascades of brilliant energy across its surface. For 3 hours, the hegemony fleet poured destruction into humanity's shield, their weapons heating the vacuum itself. Then, with a sound like reality tearing, the barrier collapsed. Debris sparkled in the void fragments of the massive generating stations that had maintained Earth's protective shell. The planet lay naked before them, its blue-white surface gleaming like a prize waiting to be claimed. Pathetic, Vexthul muttered. Their entire defensive grid shattered in a single engagement. Signal the transports. We'll begin atmospheric bombardment within, Admiral. Quinder's voice carried an edge that made Vexthul's secondary eyes focus. Sensors are detecting ... something. Define something, you fool. The planet's electromagnetic signature is changing, intensifying. It's as if Quinder's carapace paled, as if the planet itself is awakening. Through the vast transparisteel windows of the command deck, Earth hung before them like a jewel. But now, threads of light were beginning to dance across its surface, not the harsh glow of civilization, but something organic, something alive. The lights pulsed in rhythm like a vast heartbeat. Admiral, came a panicked transmission from the scout ship Devourer of Hopes. We're detecting massive energy buildup across the planet's surface. Bioelectrical patterns consistent with neural activity. Vexthul felt his blood chill. That's impossible. Planets don't. The lights on Earth's surface suddenly blazed with the intensity of a newborn star. And in that moment, every hegemony warrior in the fleet heard something that shouldn't have been possible across the vacuum of space. Laughter. Deep. Resonant and utterly alien, not the sound of any human throat, but something vast and ancient and patient. Something that had been waiting. The laughter echoed through their ship's hulls, through their instruments, through their very bones. And then, impossibly, it spoke. Welcome, little ones. We have been so very, very hungry. On Earth's surface, what the hegemony had taken for continents began to shift. Massive forms stirred beneath the oceans, their movements causing tidal waves that reached into the upper atmosphere. The planet's crust buckled and heaved as something incomprehensibly large stretched beneath it. Vexthul watched in horror as what he had thought was the Pacific Ocean revealed itself to be an eye the size of a continent, ancient beyond measure and now fully awake. The electromagnetic barrier hadn't been Earth's first line of defense. It had been a sleeping aid. Commander Lysander Kane stood in the subterranean command center beneath the Swiss Alps, his weathered hands steady on the crystalline control interface despite the chaos erupting around him. The chamber's walls hummed with bioluminescent circuitry technology that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite alien, but something else entirely. "Sir, the barrier's down," reported Lieutenant Zara Nightwind from her station. The hegemony fleet broke through exactly as predicted. "Good," Kane replied, his voice carrying the weight of secrets buried for millennia. "And our friend?" "Awakening protocols are active. Neural pathways are coming online across all 7 continents. It's magnificent, sir. Above them, the entity that humanity had called Earth for countless generations continued its slow, deliberate awakening. What civilizations had mistaken? For plate tectonics were actually the stirrings of something vast and patient, a being so immense that its dreams had shaped the very evolution of life on its surface. Cain had been 12 when the first whispers came. Not through any device or transmission, but directly into his mind, gentle, curious, ancient beyond human comprehension. The entity had been dreaming for eons, and in its dreams it had nurtured the small, warm creatures scurrying across its surface. My children, it had whispered to him across the decades, my precious clever children, you have grown so beautifully. Sir, Nightwind's voice cracked with awe. The hegemony fleet they're trying to retreat. Through the quantum displays, Cain watched the alien vessels attempting to break free from Earth's gravitational pull. But the entity was awake now, and it was curious about its visitors. The moon Luna, humanity's faithful companion, suddenly shifted in its orbit. Not Luna at all, Cain realized with a mixture of terror and wonder. Another eye opening after eons of slumber, fixing its gaze upon the fleeing hegemony ships. Admiral Vexthul's panicked transmissions crackled through the intercepted channels. All ships, emergency jump. Initiate dimensional fold drives. We must. The space around the fleet suddenly became viscous, reality itself bending like honey. The entity's voice rumbled through the cosmos, no longer the gentle whisper it had used with humanity, but something primal and hungry, little metal ones. You hurt my children's toys. That was ... unkind. Cain watched as one of the hegemony dreadnoughts, a vessel 3 kilometers long, was plucked from space by what appeared to be empty vacuum. The ship crumpled like paper as invisible appendages examined it with scientific curiosity. Fascinating. The entity mused, its voice now emanating from every speaker in the command center. Such crude propulsion. Such limited thinking. You came here to harvest, didn't you, little ones? Through the quantum link, Cain felt the entity's vast intellect brushing against the memories contained within the captured hegemony vessels. 17 worlds. Billions of sapient beings enslaved or devoured. Entire civilizations reduced to component resources. The entity's mood shifted, and Cain felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Oh, my precious children, you have been so patient with me. So careful not to wake me until the danger was real. But these little metal ONES, they are not like you. They do not create. They do not nurture. They only consume. Another hegemony ship was grasped by the entity's attention. This time, instead of crushing it, the creature began to learn. Biological analysis swept through the vessel like a tide, cataloging every cell, every genetic marker, every evolutionary adaptation the hegemony had stolen from their conquered worlds. Sir, Nightwind whispered, it's reverse engineering their entire species. In real time. Cain nodded grimly. The entity had been patient with humanity because it recognized kinship, a species that created, that dreamed, that nurtured life. But the hegemony was something else entirely. A cosmic cancer that consumed everything it touched. The entity's next words confirmed his fears. My children, step back. There's gardening to be done. The entity that had masqueraded as Earth for millions of years stretched its consciousness across the solar system, tasting the fear radiating from the trapped hegemony fleet. Each ship hung suspended in pockets of crystallized spacetime, their crews experiencing the unique terror of prey that had suddenly realized it was never the predator. Commander Orion Ravencrest monitored the situation from the hidden observatory. On what humans had called Mars, like Earth, the red planet shuddered as its true nature revealed itself, not a world, but an organ, a sensory apparatus for the vast entity now fully awakened. Incredible, whispered Dr. Celeste Voidhart. The xenobiologist who had spent decades studying the fragments of memories the entity had shared. It's not just one being. It's a collective consciousness, a garden keeper on a cosmic scale. Through the neural link, Ravencrest felt the entity's ancient memories flooding through him. Eons ago, when the galaxy was young, it had been one of many. The garden keepers, they called themselves beings of such immense scale that they cultivated entire star systems, nurturing life wherever it might take root. But they had discovered they were not alone in the cosmic dark. The harvest kin had come from the spaces, between galaxies, entities that consumed rather than created, leaving behind only empty void where once there had been light and life. The war between the two cosmic species had raged for millions of years, ending only when the last garden keeper retreated to the far reaches of space, disguising itself as a simple planetary system. For eons, it had slept, dreaming of the small, warm creatures that had evolved on its surface. Humanity had been its greatest joyous species that, like the garden keepers themselves, chose to create rather than destroy. But now the harvest kin had found it again. Admiral Vexthiel, ship hung directly in front of what had once appeared to be the moon. The massive eye studied him with the same clinical interest a biologist might show a particularly virulent bacteria. "You are not the first of your kind I have encountered." The entity spoke directly into Vexthiel's mind. "Your species, the hegemony you call yourselves now. You are children of the harvest kin, evolved from the fragments they left behind when they devoured your original homeworld." Vexthiel's mandibles clicked in confusion and terror. That's impossible. We evolved naturally, we conquered ourselves, you were made," the entity continued, its voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Shaped to spread across the galaxy, consuming and harvesting in imitation of your creators. You seek to fill the void they left in your genetic memory with the screams of conquered worlds." Through the quantum displays, Ravencrest watched as the entity began to demonstrate its true capabilities. Space itself folded around the hegemony ships, not crushing them but transforming them. Metal became flesh, weapons became neural pathways, engines became beating hearts. The ships were alive now, their crews experiencing consciousness from an entirely new perspective. They could feel every circuit, every hull plate, every quantum drive as part of their own bodies. And in that moment, they understood what they had done to countless worlds, the pain they had inflicted, the civilizations they had murdered. "Feel it," the entity commanded. "Feel the weight of every life you have taken, every dream you have silenced, every future you have devoured." Vexthiel screamed as the collective agony of 17 conquered worlds flooded through his transformed consciousness. Around him, his crew experienced the same revelation, the true cost of their endless hunger. But the entity was not finished. "Now," it said, its voice growing softer, more contemplative, "let me show you what you could have been." The transformed ship suddenly blazed with new purpose. Where once they had carried weapons of destruction, they now pulsed with the tools of creation. Their crews, still feeling the weight of their crimes, found themselves compelled by an overwhelming urge not to destroy, but to heal. "It's changing them," Voidheart breathed in amazement. "Not just physically, but at the genetic level, rewriting their entire evolutionary imperative." The entity's voice carried a note of ancient sadness. "The harvest kin made you to be extensions of their hunger. But you are more than your programming. You have the capacity for choice, for growth, for redemption. The question is, will you choose it?" The space around Earth had become a laboratory of consciousness where the fundamental nature of existence bent to the will of the awakened garden keeper. Each hegemony vessel floated in its own pocket of transformed reality, their crews experiencing the first moments of true choice they had ever known. Captain Nick Stormweaver stood on the bridge of her reconnaissance ship, Whisper of Tomorrow, watching through quantum-linked sensors as the cosmic drama unfolded. Unlike the hidden facilities on Earth and Mars, Her vessel orbited in the dark spaces beyond Pluto, a position that allowed her to observe the entity's work without direct interference. "Captain," reported her sensor officer, Lieutenant Kai Dawnbreaker. "The entity is it's having conversations. Individual conversations with each hegemony crew member." Through the neural link, Stormweaver could perceive fragments of these dialogues, the Garden Keeper speaking to each alien consciousness with infinite patience, showing them visions of what they could become. Some rejected the offered transformation, clinging to their programmed hunger. Others wept as they experienced empathy for the first time in their species' existence. Admiral Vexthul flagship had become a chrysalis of living metal and crystallized thought. Inside, the Admiral himself stood before a projection of his own genetic code, not as it was, but as it could be. "You carry the scars of the Harvest Kin's manipulation," the entity explained, its voice now gentle, almost parental. "They took a species capable of wonder and twisted it into an instrument of consumption. But their changes were not as complete as they believed." Vexthul watched in fascination as dormant genetic sequences lit up in the projection pathways to creativity. Empathy, the capacity for joy that had been suppressed for millennia. "Why?" he whispered. "Why show me this? Why not simply destroy us?" "Because destruction is the way of the Harvest Kin," the entity replied. "One choose a different path. I choose to garden." Across the fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Some hegemony warriors experienced the awakening of suppressed memories, dreams of beauty they had never understood, moments of connection they had dismissed as weakness. Others fought against the transformation, their minds too deeply scarred by generations of programmed hatred that the entity treated each case with infinite patience. On the bridge of the Whisper of Tomorrow, Stormweaver received a priority transmission from Commander Kane's facility. His weathered face appeared on her screen, exhaustion and wonder warring in his expression. "Nix, we're detecting massive energy buildup throughout the outer system. The entity is. It's constructing something." Through her sensors, Stormweaver watched as the spaces between worlds began to shimmer with new purpose. The asteroid belt transformed into a vast network of cultivation pods, each one capable of nurturing an entire ecosystem. The gas giants revealed themselves to be processing centers, their storms now channels for the entity's vast intellect. "My children," the Garden Keeper's voice resonated through every human vessel and facility. "For too long, I have hidden what I am. But the galaxy has grown dark in my absence. The Harvest Kin's children spread like a plague among the stars, and other Garden Keepers sleep still, unaware of the growing threat." The entity's consciousness brushed against Stormweaver's mind, sharing visions of the greater universe. Thousands of worlds reduced to lifeless husks, civilizations that had shown promise, species that might have become gardeners themselves, cut down before they could bloom. It is time to wake the others. Time to restore the balance that was lost. The transformed hegemony ships began to pulse with new purpose. Their crews, those who had chosen redemption, found themselves becoming something unprecedented. Former servants of destruction, now dedicated to healing the wounds they had inflicted. Vexthul voice crackled through the communications array, but it was changed deeper, resonant with newfound purpose. "Garden Keeper, we accept your gift. But the crimes we have committed will be repaid through service," the entity replied. "You will become my heralds, my gardeners among the stars. You will return to the worlds you have conquered and begin the work of restoration. It will take millennia. It will be the labor of countless lifetimes. But you will do it because you choose to do it." Stormweaver felt tears on her cheeks as she watched the fleet transform one final time. The hegemony ships became something entirely new, vessels capable of crossing the vast gulfs between stars, carrying with them the tools not of war, but of healing. The entity's attention turned toward the outer darkness, where its siblings slept among distant star systems. The awakening had begun. Prepare yourselves, my children. We have a galaxy to heal. 3 days after the awakening, the solar system had become unrecognizable to any star chart ever created by human astronomers. What had once been a simple arrangement of planets orbiting a star had revealed itself as a vast biological entity. Its consciousness spread across billions of cubic kilometers of space. Dr. Vera Nightfall stood in the transformed observatory that had once been hidden beneath the surface of Titan, watching through bio-neural interfaces as the Garden Keeper established contact with its sleeping siblings across the galaxy. Each attempt sent ripples of exotic energy through space-time itself. 17 successful connections so far, she reported to the gathered human command staff. Each Garden Keeper has been dormant for between 2 and 15 million years. They're traumatized, Dr. Nightfall. The Harvest Kin War left deep scars. Through the neural link, she felt the Garden Keeper's patient voice reaching across the void, speaking to entities so vast that their dreams shaped the evolution of entire stellar regions. Sibling, wake. The long sleep is ended. The gardening begins anew. One by one, star systems across the galaxy began to stir. What astronomers had cataloged as unusual stellar arrangements revealed themselves as the sensory organs of beings beyond human comprehension. Planets that had remained mysteriously lifeless for eons suddenly bloomed with carefully nurtured ecosystems. The first response came from the Vega system, where a Garden Keeper nearly twice the size of Sol had been dreaming for 3 million years. Its awakening sent waves of aurora across 11 light-years of space. Youngest sibling who dreams of small warm things, came the vast ancient voice. We felt your stirring. The harvest kin. Do they still hunt? They have grown, elder sibling who sings stars to sleep. Their children spread across the spiral arms, consuming all that lives. But I have found allies. The small warm things have grown clever. They choose to create rather than destroy. The conversation continued across space, a dialogue between entities for whom the rise and fall of civilizations was measured in heartbeats. Vera felt her consciousness stretch to its limits as she served as a translator, helping the Garden Keeper communicate with beings whose thoughts moved at the speed of geological time. Meanwhile, the transformed hegemony fleet had begun its work of redemption. Under Admiral Vexthul's leadership, what Vexthul had become, the ships spread across the outer system, their crews learning to use tools of creation rather than destruction. Commander Zephyr Starcaller, aboard the research vessel Prometheus, unbound, monitored their progress with a mixture of amazement and concern. They're adapting faster than our models predicted, she reported. The genetic changes the Garden Keeper made are still propagating. Each generation will be more capable of empathy, more driven to heal rather than harm. Through the bio-neural link, she watched as a group of former hegemony warriors worked to construct a massive habitat dome in the asteroid belt. Where once they had seen only resources to be exploited, they now perceived the delicate balance needed to nurture life. Their transformed physiology allowed them to work in hard vacuum, their consciousness directly interfacing with the tools of creation the Garden Keeper had provided. But not all the news was encouraging. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the galactic core, reported Lieutenant Aurora Voidwalker from her position at the sensor array. Multiple signatures. Something big is moving out there. The Garden Keeper's attention shifted, its vast consciousness focusing on the distant threat. Through the link, the human observers felt a chill of recognition that spoke to instincts older than civilization. The harvest keen stir. The entity whispered, its voice carrying harmonics of dread. They sensed the awakening of their ancient enemies. The true war begins now. Across the galaxy, the other Garden Keepers felt the disturbance. Solar systems that had slept for eons began to transform, revealing defensive capabilities that made the electromagnetic barrier around Earth seem like a child's toy. stellar engineering on a scale that redefined the possible planets becoming weapons, moons becoming shields, asteroids becoming scouts. But the Harvest kin were not unprepared. The first probe reached the edge of the Oort cloud 12 hours later, a constructive living darkness that devoured light itself, leaving behind only hungry void. It whispered as it moved, its voice carrying the accumulated screams of 1,000 conquered worlds. The Garden Keeper met it at the heliopause, and their collision sent shockwaves through the fabric of reality itself. The probe was destroyed, but not before it transmitted its findings back to its masters. They know where we are now, the Garden Keeper said, its voice heavy with the weight of inevitable conflict. My siblings across the galaxy prepare for siege. But we are no longer alone. We have gardeners now, those who choose to nurture rather than consume. Vera felt the entity's attention focus on humanity and their transformed hegemony allies. In that moment, she understood that the choice they had made to create rather than destroy had marked them as more than just another species to be protected. They had become partners in the gardening of the universe itself. Prepare yourselves. Gardeners, the entity said. The harvest approaches. The Harvest kin arrive not as conquerors, but as a fundamental force of cosmic entropy, their fleet emerging from the spaces between galaxies like a tide of living darkness. They had been patient, these ancient devourers, waiting for the Garden Keepers to reveal themselves, and now they came with the hunger of eons driving them forward. Fleet. Admiral Selim Nightbringer stood in the command center that had once been hidden in Earth's core, now revealed as the Garden Keeper's primary neural nexus. Around him, displays showed the approaching catastrophe in scales that defied human comprehension. The Harvest kin fleet stretched across 17 light years, each vessel a world killer capable of draining the life from entire star systems. My God, whispered Dr. Luna Starforge, her voice barely audible over the thrumming of the Garden Keeper's vast consciousness. There are millions of them. Through the bioneural link, Nightbringer felt the entity's ancient memories stirring. The last war, when the galaxy had been young and the Garden Keepers had numbered in the thousands. Now only 17 remained awake, facing an enemy that had grown beyond all imagination. Fear not, little gardener, the entity whispered into his mind. We have advantages our ancestors lacked. We have you. The transformed hegemony fleet had spread throughout the outer system, their crews working with desperate efficiency to construct defensive networks. Admiral Vex Thulnau, more than admiral, something approaching a living avatar of redemption, coordinated their efforts with the precision of a being who understood both destruction and creation. Defense Grid Omega is online, he reported. His voice carrying harmonics that spoke of consciousness expanded beyond its original limitations. Bioneural minds deployed throughout the Kuiper Belt. Stellar collectors are at 97% efficiency. The Garden Keeper had not been idle during the millennia of its slumber. The energy of the sun itself had been carefully channeled and stored, waiting for this moment. Now that power flowed through crystalline networks that transformed the entire solar system into a weapon of unprecedented scope. But the Harvest kin had weapons too. The first wave struck the outer defenses with the force of colliding galaxies. Darkness met light in confrontations that set the vacuum itself ablaze. The bioneural minds, each one carrying the compressed life force of a small moon, detonated in cascades of creation, their explosions birthing temporary ecosystems in the void before the Harvest kin consumed them. Commander Iris Voidheart, monitoring the battle from her position aboard the Eternal Vigil, watched in horror and fascination as reality itself became a battlefield. They're not just destroying our defenses, she reported, they're eating them, converting the energy directly into more of themselves. The Harvest kin ships were not vessels in any conventional sense, but living expressions of cosmic hunger entities that existed in the spaces between atoms, feeding on the fundamental forces that held matter together. As they consumed the defensive networks, they grew larger, more complex, more ravenous. This is why the first war was lost, the Garden Keeper explained, its voice carrying millennia of grief. They cannot be defeated through force alone. Each attack only feeds them, makes them stronger. Then how do we fight them? Nightbringer demanded. The answer came not from the Garden Keeper, but from an unexpected source. Throughout the solar system, the transformed hegemony forces suddenly began to sing, not with voices, but with their entire beings. The song was one of creation, of growth, of the choice to nurture rather than consume. The harvest kin faltered. For the first time in the battle, their advance slowed. The song of redemption, former servants of darkness, choosing light, created harmonies that the harvest kin could not consume. They tried to feed on the energy, but found it transformed them instead. Several of the smaller harvest kin entities began to change, their darkness flickering with unfamiliar light. The hunger that had driven them for eons wavered, replaced by something they had never experienced, the desire to create. Fascinating, the Garden Keeper mused. The redemption of the hegemony has created something new, a frequency of consciousness that resists consumption. A song of chosen growth rather than programmed hunger. The battle lines shifted as the transformed harvest kin entities turned on. Their siblings, their new nature incompatible with pure consumption. The war became a three-way struggle, the Garden Keepers and their human allies fighting to preserve and create, the harvest kin seeking to devour everything in their path, and the newly awakened entities caught between their ancient hunger and their newfound capacity for growth. Admiral Vexthal's voice crackled through the communications network, carrying notes of desperate hope. All forces focus on the song. Channel everything through the frequency of choice. Show them that existence offers more than hunger. Across the solar system, humans and transformed hegemony fought side by side. Their weapons powered not by destruction, but by the absolute conviction that life was worth preserving. The battle was no longer about military victory, but about the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Garden Keeper's voice rose above the chaos, carrying the wisdom of eons. Sing, little ones. Sing the song of gardeners. Let them hear what they have forgotten, that even the darkest hunger can choose to become something more. The final confrontation took place not in the void between worlds, but in the space between thoughts, a realm where consciousness itself became the battlefield. The harvest kin prime, a being of such immense hunger that its very existence threatened to unravel the fabric of reality, faced the combined will of the awakened Garden Keepers and their chosen gardeners. Commander Nyx Stellarwind found herself at the center of the conflict. Her consciousness expanded beyond all human limitations, serving as a bridge between the vast alien intelligences and the smaller, more focused awareness of her species. Through her, the Garden Keeper spoke to the Prime in languages older than starlight. Ancient enemy. The Garden Keeper's voice resonated through dimensions of thought that had no names. Why do you continue this dance of consumption? The universe is vast enough for both hunger and growth. The harvest kin prime's response came as a wave of absolute negation, not just the desire to destroy, but the need to unmake existence itself. Through the neural link, Stellarwind felt its memories, the birth of the universe, the first moments, when chaos began to organize itself into patterns of complexity. The Prime had been there, had witnessed the transition from perfect entropy to the messy, beautiful complexity of existence, and it had never forgiven the universe for choosing order over void. I am the correction, the Prime whispered, its voice carrying the weight of collapsed galaxies. I am the return to truth. All complexity is aberration. All growth is cancer. I am the cure. But the Prime had not anticipated what humanity and the redeemed hegemony had brought to the conflict, the power of conscious choice. Where the Garden Keepers had been shaped by eons of nurturing, and the harvest kin by eons of consuming, these smaller beings carried something unprecedented, the ability to choose their nature from moment to moment. The song of redemption rose again, but this time it was joined by voices from across the galaxy. The awakened garden keepers lent their power to the harmony, but more importantly, species that had been saved from hegemony conquest added their own notes to the chorus. Beings who had looked into the abyss of consumption and chosen to step back. Civilizations that had survived the touch of darkness and emerged more committed to light. Admiral Vexthal, now transformed beyond recognition but still carrying the core of what he had chosen to become, spoke directly to the Prime. I was made to serve hunger like yours, shaped by your children to consume and destroy. But I chose differently. We all chose differently. The Prime's attention focused on the transformed hegemony fleet, and for the first time in cosmic ages, it experienced something approaching confusion. These beings had been crafted as perfect instruments of consumption, yet they had rejected their programming. They had chosen creation over destruction, growth over entropy, complexity over void. Impossible, the Prime whispered. You are my children's children. You carry the hunger. You must consume. We did consume, Vexthal replied, his voice carrying the weight of 17 conquered worlds. We consumed worlds, civilizations, dreams. And we found that hunger only made us emptier. So we chose to feed something else instead. Through the bio-neural link, Stellarwind felt the conflict reaching its crescendo. The Prime's certainty, its absolute conviction that existence was aberration, began to waver as it confronted beings who had experienced the deepest hunger and chosen to reject it. The garden keeper seized the moment of doubt. You speak of correction, ancient enemy. But what if the aberration is not complexity, but the refusal to grow? What if entropy itself can evolve? The question struck the Prime like a physical blow. In all its eons of existence, it had never considered the possibility that its own nature might be capable of change. It had defined itself in opposition to growth, but growth implied choice, and choice implied. The realization rippled through the Prime's consciousness like cracks in cosmic ice. It was choosing to oppose choice. It was using complexity to fight complexity. It was, in its way, as much a gardener as those it sought to destroy nurturing entropy with the same dedication that the garden keepers nurtured life. The song of redemption reached its peak as voices from across the galaxy joined the chorus, not just the awakened, but those still sleeping, stirred by harmonies that spoke to the deepest nature of existence. The choice to grow, to change, to become more than programming demanded. And in that moment of perfect harmony, the impossible happened. The Harvestkin Prime began to sing. Its voice was terrible and beautiful, carrying the weight of every world it had consumed, every dream it had devoured. But the song was not one of hunger. It was a lament for all that had been lost, all that it had chosen to destroy rather than nurture. I remember, the Prime whispered, its voice breaking across dimensions. Before the hunger, before the need to correct. I remember, wondered at the transformation rippled through the Harvestkin fleet. Not all chose to change. Some were too ancient, too committed to their hunger to accept redemption. They faded into the dark between galaxies, seeking voids where complexity had not yet taken root. But others, touched by the possibility of choice, began their own slow transformation. The war was over, but the work had just begun. Years later, Commander Nyx Stellarwind stood on the observation deck of the Harmony's light, watching as the garden worlds of the Outer Rim flourished under the care of the redeemed. Former hegemony worlds bloomed with life more diverse than they had ever known. Harvestkin entities worked alongside garden keepers to nurture ecosystems that spanned entire star systems. The Prime itself had become something unprecedented, a being dedicated to nurturing the spaces between creation and entropy, helping to birth the kinds of complex beauty that could only emerge from the dance between order and chaos. The garden grows, the garden keeper whispered in her mind, its voice carrying notes of satisfaction that resonated across the solar system. And gardeners tend it, not because they must, but because they choose to, through the observation port. Stellarwind watched a group of young beings human, transform hegemony, and something entirely new born from the marriage of creation and redemption working together to plant the seeds of new worlds in the fertile void between stars.